It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast, covering your real estate news from all corners of the Australian property market 7 days a week. Yes, as heard on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Amazon. Just a reminder, don't forget, if you'd like to get in touch with us, our email address is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. Well, it's a Tuesday morning, August the 13th today, and at the start of the new financial year, many Australians, of course, saw their incomes increase slightly with a 3.75% rise in the minimum wage. Of course, announced by the Fair Work Commission, this boost aims to help with the cost of living pressures, which is affecting about 22% of the workforce, primarily women and casual workers. And this wage increase really does target some of the poorest households in Australia. While housing costs, of course, are a major factor in the cost of living crisis, the wage increase may not significantly impact on the property and rental market. The annual minimum wage rise is intended to keep up with inflation. So let's catch up this morning with Sean Langcake, the Chief Economist at Oxford Economics Australia. And good morning to you, Sean. Welcome to the Real Estate Breakfast. Great to have you on.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
You say that the minimum wage increase is supposed to help with the cost of living pressures, not necessarily is going to go down that route for many people.
Well, each year the Fair Work Commission has a look at the economic backdrop, thinks about the pace of inflation and how people's cost of living is increasing, as well as how tight the labour market is and how employers can withstand an increase in the minimum wage. And this year, as you rightly point out, they came to a decision that 3.75% was a fair increase. We know that things like mortgage costs, rental costs are tracking a little bit quicker than that. So, it's certainly a help to have a little bit more money in your pocket come 1st of July, but this certainly isn't an increase of the magnitude that will kind of be a silver bullet for the cost of living pressures that a lot of households are facing.
Yeah, as you say, certainly helps with people keeping up with their rents and their mortgage costs. It's interesting that, like in the media, we hear this word, it will significantly affect property prices. And I think most people can sort of look at those words and go, really? Is this likely to affect the property prices? Because unfortunately, it is the minimum wage that we're talking about, where unfortunately people can't transact a lot of the time on property.
Yeah, you can put me in the camp of people who don't really think this is going to have a major impact. The minimum wage changes, they do filter out to those that are not on the minimum wage directly. They affect a lot of collective bargaining and award wage decisions. But, overwhelmingly, it's not kind of going to move the needle on how much you can afford to pay back in a mortgage. Any kind of change in interest rates is really going to swamp that. And we have very, very strong fundamentals still for house prices at the moment, in the sense that we have growing demand and supply is really not keeping up with that. And it's a little bit the same on the rental side of the market, where you think that, those directly affected by this decision are perhaps more likely to be in the rental market. Really what dominates here is the vacancy rate, the fact that we have so few properties available to rent at the moment. That's really going to be the dominating factor, rather than an increase in the minimum wage or even an income tax cut, which people also got from 1 July. That's kind of going to be small beer, and not all kind of landlords are going to be able to immediately put up their prices to respond to that.
Yeah, I would say that it could obviously help somebody with their borrowing capacity. It's something that we talk a lot about with our mortgage experts. It's all about that loan serviceability. It might tick up a little bit on the credit side, and that's obviously a good thing.
Yeah, like I say, I mean, every little bit helps, and it's all moving in the right direction. And again, I'd emphasize that the tax cut has a similar impact here as well. Again, though, it kind of gets swamped by a change in interest rates, and obviously we see them being on hold for the next little while. So a little bit of an improvement in an easing in credit conditions really from the 1st of July.
Yes, we'll come back in just a moment and discuss the interest rate pause from last week and what's likely to happen between now and the end of the year.
Listen to in-depth discussions with industry leaders on investing options, understanding different suburbs with insider perspectives and exclusive tips.
And good morning to you, Evan in Paddington in Sydney this morning, a listener who emailed in to say that he found us a few weeks ago. Currently, you mentioned that you are renting and you said that you have got a high-paying job, but wanted to let us know that you have got friends. This is off the back of one of our podcasts we were talking about. You have got friends who have decided to move out of Sydney because it is too expensive. And where have they gone? They have gone to Melbourne, which seems to be a location that people are moving into. Don't forget, of course, if you would like to send us an email, our email address is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. And a quick mention here about the auction activity in capital cities last weekend. It rose to 4.5% week on week. 1,850 homes that were scheduled for auction compared to 1,778 last week. And if you were one of those people attending an auction last weekend and you snared yourself a property, hey, congratulations.
As we approach 1,000 episodes, a big thanks to all of our guests for their insightful knowledge, trends and forecasts. We look forward to another 1,000 episodes together.
And it is a Real Estate Tuesday, the 13th today, so I hope that you're not too superstitious. We are talking with Sean Langcake, who is the Chief Economist at Oxford Economics Australia, talking a little bit about the minimum wage increase, which obviously any little bit of money coming in, particularly for those people that are badly affected in terms of incomes, it's got to help. But yeah, last week, Sean, the RBA, they decided to pause and they said, no, we're not going to increase. Where's the think tank at your organisation on this?
Well, we think that we are kind of out of the danger zone now where we were likely to see more hikes. Of course, the RBA's been on hold since November last year, and they've been doing this dance where they've been telling the market and telling anyone that will listen, yeah, we're really thinking hard and about another interest rate hike. But, they've never really backed it up and come to the table with a hike. The reason being is that they're really conscious and they want to keep life in the labour market. We know that the best way forward for economic growth and for people to be able to keep up with their mortgages and their rents is to have a job. And so, if we're thinking about inflation, purely about inflation, which is the RBA's mandate first and foremost, there's a really strong case to have higher interest rates at the moment. Inflation is really well entrenched. It's above the RBA's target, but they've taken a very patient approach to bring it back down in order to keep life in the labour market. Now, there has to be a limit to their patience, but we haven't found it yet. And we do see things like utilities subsidies coming in from next quarter, an increase in Commonwealth rental assistance. So, inflation numbers are going to take a bit of a step down from here. So we kind of think that, we've ridden out that period where there might be another hike, and we see rates being on hold for the rest of the year. That does mean that, the question then becomes, well, when are they likely to cut? When am I going to get some relief on my mortgage payments? I think there the news isn't so good. We don't really see them being in a position to be able to cut rates until, around May next year.
Well, people with mortgages, that is not what they want to hear. You talked about the labour market, and for our listeners with mortgages, that is a very big part of the RBA and the state of the labour market figures. Now, they're coming out on Thursday. Just how important are those numbers tied into the whole scheme of this whole pause mode at the moment?
They're absolutely critical, and somewhat counterintuitively, good news on the labour market at this point in time might actually be bad news for interest rates. If we saw a big tick down in the unemployment rate, that is likely to signal that inflation pressures are going to be stronger and is the thing that may actually bring the RBA back to the table and give us another hike. Now, we don't think that's going to happen. We've seen over the last kind of year or so a very gradual, but it's very evident slackening in the labour market. We now have the unemployment rate up above 4%, and really the RBA signalling that they think it's going to need to get to 4.25%, maybe even 4.5%, to really take the sting out of underlying inflation pressures that we've got at the moment. Interestingly, one thing we've observed of late is that if you take out segments of the market that are really driven by public sector hiring, there's really been very little growth in employment over the last year or so. So 4 in 5 jobs over the last 12 months have been in health, education, and public administration. So, outside of those areas, there is a big slowdown in the labour market underway, which will help bring inflation back down. But it's obviously, not good news for those caught up in that cycle.
It's just taking such a long period of time. I've never known a property cycle like this. And I think that the RBA, they sat down and they thought, what's the key word that we can use to try and sort of paint a bit of a picture on the position that we are in? And the word that they came up with, Sean, is sticky. I have never heard that word so many times used. It's a sticky situation.
Absolutely. Look, they're really referring to the persistence of inflation pressures, and it's really kind of evident. A lot of things, the prices for a lot of the goods and services we consume are set with reference to what inflation was last year. So we're coming out of a situation where inflation was as high as 7%. More recently, in the past year, it's been 4 and 5%. If you're changing prices now with reference to that, then you're putting your prices up by 4% or so. You can kind of see how that cycle kind of gets a bit of a life of its own. So the hope is that we're going to have a little bit of a circuit breaker in some administered prices with big utility subsidies coming through from Q3, which will give some relief. But yeah, I think we've all been a little bit surprised at the kind of life of its own that this inflation cycle's taken on.
Yeah, no, good point. It's got a life of its own. That is the sticky situation. Hey, great to chat with you, Sean. Thank you for some of those insights from your camp. Enjoy your Tuesday, and thanks for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Don't navigate the real estate market alone. Let us help guide you in the world of real estate every day. Make better informed decisions with the latest news and insights.
It almost sounds weird when we say that we've found another one of these locations around Australia that is affordable. It is called Nyngan.
It's just a really great place to raise kids. Like, I have 3 little boys, and they're always out on an adventure. They're motorbike riding, or they're walking through the paddock collecting sticks, or they're water skiing on the river. I think a lot of families stay around for that. It's a really easy, nice lifestyle.
Because it's quite big with the mining and also the farming.
Yeah, so mining and farming, they are our biggest industries. So we have a lot of employment in the mines. I think they employ about 500 people out there. A lot of employment on all the farms.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.